The very first American trial of the century began during the final days of the 1700s. December 22nd, 1799 to be exact, because that was the last time anyone saw Elma Sands alive. She was born in the Connecticut Valley and moved to New York that July. Elma lived in a boarding house at 208 Greenwich Street that was owned by her married cousin Catherine Ring and her cousin's husband Elias. It was in this house where she met Levi Weeks. He came to New York to work as a carpenter for his brother Ezra, who owned New York City's most successful construction company at the time. Elma and Levi began dating sometime in the period leading up to her death. The official account of her last moments go like this. That evening, people in the house heard Elma in her room walking around, and they saw Levi in the sitting room waiting for something. Voices were heard, but no one saw who was speaking. The front door opened and closed, and then the house was silent. Catherine Ring said that Elma told her she was going to elope with Levi that evening. A friend of hers spotted Elma on the street walking with a companion, but the friend could not identify who she was with, and that was it. The following day she was reported missing, but immediately after, New Yorkers learned about George Washington's death, and Elma Sands was temporarily forgotten by the public consciousness as the city went into mourning. The police still searched for her, but her body wasn't in any of the rivers or in the woods. A pair of earmuffs she borrowed from a friend were discovered in Lispenard's Meadows with tracks belonging to a one-horse sleigh near them. Lispenard's Meadows is the current site of Soho. On January 2nd, 1800, just after the holiday season ended, Elma Sands' body was discovered at the bottom of a well belonging to the Manhattan Company. The forensic science of 1800 was not close to what we have today. We do know that her dress was torn, her body had bruises, and an autopsy was performed, but its only purpose was to determine if she was pregnant or not at the time of her death. She was not. But we are still unsure of how she exactly died. One of the men that pulled her body from the well claimed her neck was broken. The prosecution's medical expert witness at the later trial claimed that he saw bruises on her neck like she was strangled. But it's also possible that she drowned from the well water after falling in accidentally or being pushed in deliberately. On January 6, a grand jury concluded that she was murdered. Richard Croucher, who also lived at the Rings boarding house, began spreading a rumor that Levi Weeks murdered Elma. 4 days later, with public opinion demanding blood, Weeks was arrested and charged with her murder. While Levi Weeks might have been just a carpenter, his brother Ezra was New York's most prominent businessman at the time. He publicly declared that his brother was with him on the night Elma disappeared and that they were discussing a construction job. But the charges were not dropped, and this wealthy man did the next best thing he could do to help his brother. He formed and hired America's original legal dream team. Henry Brockway's Livingston is largely forgotten about today, but in his time, he was a Revolutionary War veteran with a prominent legal mind that had an impressive career which climaxed in 1806 when Thomas Jefferson nominated him for the Supreme Court. Joining him were two other war veterans that are more famous to modern Americans, and their working together makes this story even more unusual as they are now remembered for being bitter enemies. They were Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. Burr would later shoot and kill Hamilton during the summer of 1804 in a duel. The trial began on March 31st, 1800 and lasted for 3 days. The case for the prosecution was entirely circumstantial and by today's standards, full of reasonable doubt. They established from multiple witnesses that Levi and Elma had a relationship. They also established that unclear events on December 22nd and the multiple theories about how she died without a conclusive cause of death. Finally, they presented to the jury that Ezra Weeks owned a sleigh similar to the one that made the tracks in the meadow, and it could be possible that Levi borrowed it that night. On April 2nd, the defense made their case. Physicians testified that it was very possible that Elma either jumped or fell into the well and drowned. Acquaintances described her character as melancholy, with one friend saying that she threatened suicide before. They even tarnished her character by accusing her of sleeping with her cousin's husband. Ezra Weeks testified that his brother was with him that night, and several other men confirmed this, giving Levi a plausible alibi. They also called out Richard Croucher for being the source of the rumors that Levi Weeks murdered Elma. They even proposed the possibility that perhaps he was the real murderer, and he was publicly accusing Levi Weeks to cover up his own guilt. At the end of the day, the closing arguments were made and the jury retired to deliberate. They came back 5 minutes later with a verdict of not guilty. But the court of public opinion still disagreed, and Levi Weeks was not welcomed anywhere in town. He eventually settled in Natchez, Mississippi, where he became a prominent architect and builder. He died in 1819 at the age of 43. His brother Ezra remained in New York and later on built Hamilton Grange for his brother's lawyer. He died in 1849. Strangely enough, there is one place from these events that is still with us today: the well where Elma's body was found. It's located at 129 Spring Street, which recently housed a clothing store with the well visible for patrons to see, giving modern-day New Yorkers a physical connection with the city's forgotten past.